welcome to Happy Storytelling. We are going to be reading a story, but first we're going to be reading the Bible, and then we're going to be doing subs, and then we're going to be reading a story.
Where is the story? Oh, it's right
Hope you guys
here.
enjoy. Make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and hit the bell notifications in the video. Here is my dad to read the Bible.
Oh no, Dad's dying! Hello! Oh no, we have light problems again. Alright, so we are on Matthew chapter 11. I will find it eventually. Alright, this is the English Standard Version. Let me begin. When Jesus had finished instructing his 12 disciples, is that where we were? Okay. When Jesus had finished instructing his 12 disciples, he went on from there to teach and preach in their cities. Now when John heard in prison about the deeds of the Christ, he sent word by his disciples and said to him, "Are you the one who is come, or shall we look for another?" And Jesus answered them, "Go and tell John what you hear and see. The blind receive their sight, and the lame walk. Lepers are cleansed, and the deaf hear, and the dead are raised up, and the poor have good news preached to them. And blessed is the one who is not offended by me." And they went away. Jesus began to speak to the crowds. As they went away, Jesus began to speak to the crowds concerning John. "What did you go out into the wilderness to see? A reed shaken by the wind? What then did you go out to see? A man dressed in soft clothing? Behold, those who wear soft clothing are in kings' houses. What then did you go out to see? A prophet? Yes, I tell you, and more than a prophet. This is he of whom it is written, 'Behold, I send my messenger before your face, who will prepare your way before you.' Truly I say to you, among those born of women, there has arisen no one greater than John the Baptist. Yet the one who is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he. From the days of John the Baptist until now, the kingdom of heaven has suffered violence, and the violent take it by force. For all the prophets and the law prophesied until John, and if you are willing to accept it, he is Elijah who is to come. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. But to what shall I compare this generation? It is like children sitting in the marketplaces and calling to their playmates, 'We played the flute for you, and you did not dance. We sang a dirge, and you did not mourn.' For John came neither eating nor drinking, and they say he has a demon. The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say, 'Look at him, a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners.' Yet wisdom is justified by her deeds." Then he began to denounce the cities where most of his mighty works had been done, because they did not repent. "Woe to you, Chorazin! Woe to you, Bethsaida! For if the mighty works done in you had been done in Tyre and Sidon, they would have repented long ago in sackcloth and ashes. But I tell you, it will be more bearable on the day of judgment for Tyre and Sidon than for you. And for you, Capernaum, will not be exalted to heaven? Will you not be exalted to heaven? You will be brought down to Hades. For if the mighty works done in you had been done in Sodom, it would have remained until this day. But I tell you that it will be more tolerable on the day of judgment for the land of Sodom than for you." At that time Jesus declared, "I thank you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, that you have hidden these things from the wise and understanding, and revealed them to little children. Yes, Father, for such was your gracious will. All things have been handed over to me by my Father, and no one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, and anyone to whom the Son chooses to reveal. Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you, and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light." That's the end of chapter 11. And, of course, I hope that God is blessing the reading of his scripture. So now we're on to Little Women. We just read chapters 14 and 13. And in 14, so what happened was they got a letter from their dad, and he said, hey, everything's rosy over here, the war's over, but the train's not working, so I can't get home. So hopefully they can get the train to work to go to Washington, so at least your mom can come visit me. And so that's what she did. She went to go visit, and they had a rosy time. And here's Kimberly to say what really happened.
They got a telegram. Yay. So it meant basically their father got very sick.
Wait, you're not allowed to talk. Now you can talk.
Ow. Their father got very sick, and he needed somebody to come over there. The army's like, hey, I'm gonna go tell your wife. So she had to go over there, and she left the girls, and they were actually doing pretty good on their own with Lori and his grandfather to help them.
And Hannah.
Oh yeah, and Hannah also. So it was a little bit embarrassing at some points. Like, I forget who. I forget. There was something that I thought. Anyway, I'm going to hand it off to Dad, who's going to read us a story. And ow, that hurt.
Power of the slut bracelet doesn't embrace you.
All right. So, one other thing that I just wanted to mention is that in the letter, Beth mentioned the Land of the Leal, which is a song that was written in the a song by Scottish songwriter Lady Carolina Nairne, who lived in 1766 to 1845. Her nickname was Carolina Oliphant. Very interesting. Anyway, so Beth wrote about that song, and she mentioned it, and I posted 2 links on the YouTube channel to that song. So you can find YouTube links to that song, but you have to go to the YouTube channel in order to get them, because that's where I posted them. All right, so, and I hope that you do that, because actually I thought it was very interesting and a very beautiful song that I'd never heard. So there you go. All right, this is chapter 17, Little Faithful. Let's go ahead and get started. For a week, the amount of virtue in the old house would have supplied the neighborhood. It was really amazing, for every one seemed in a heavenly frame of mind, and self-denial was all the fashion. Excuse me. Relieved of their first anxiety about their father, the girls insensibly relaxed their praiseworthy efforts a little and began to fall back into the old ways. They did not forget their motto, but hoping and keeping busy seemed to grow easier, and after such tremendous exertions they felt the endeavor deserved a holiday and gave it a good many. Joe caught a bad cold through neglecting to cover the shorn head enough, and was ordered to stay home till she was better, for Aunt March didn't like to hear people read with colds in their heads. Joe liked this, and after an energetic rummage from garret to cellar, subsided on the sofa to nurse her cold with arsenicum and books, which is a short for arsenicum album or arsenic trioxide, though it is still used today in extreme dilution as a homeopathic medicine. The compound is toxic and quite dangerous. Wow, lovely.
Arsenic.
All right. Amy found that housework and art did not go well together and returned to her mud pies. Meg went daily to her kingdom and sewed, or thought she did, at home, but much time was spent in writing long letters to her mother or reading the Washington dispatches over and over. Beth kept on, with only slight relapses into idleness or grieving. All the little duties were faithfully done each day, and many of her sisters also, for they were forgetful, and the house seemed like a clock whose pendulum was gone a-visiting. When her heart got heavy with longings for mother or fears for father, she went away into a certain closet, hid her face in the folds of a certain dear old gown, and made her little moan, and prayed her little prayer quietly by herself. Nobody knew what cheered her up after a sober fit, but everyone felt how sweet and helpful Beth was, and fell into a way of going to her for comfort or advice in their small affairs. All were unconscious that this experience was a test of character, and when the first excitement was over, felt that they had done well and deserved praise. So they did. But their mistake was in ceasing to do well, and they learned this lesson through much anxiety and regret. "Meg, I wish you'd come and see the Hummels. You know, Mother told us not to forget them," said Beth, 10 days after Mrs. March's departure. "I'm too tired to go this afternoon," replied Meg, rocking comfortably as she sewed. "Can't you, Joe?" asked Beth. "Too stormy for me with my cold." "I thought it was most well." "It's well enough for me to go out with Laurie, but not well enough to go to the Hummels," said Joe, laughing, but looking a little ashamed of her inconsistency. "Why don't you go yourself?" asked Meg. "I have been every day, but the baby is sick, and I don't know what to do for it. Mrs. Hummel goes away to work, and Lottchen takes care of it, but it gets sicker and sicker, and I think you or Hannah ought to go." Beth spoke earnestly, and Meg promised she would go tomorrow. "Ask Hannah for some nice little mess, and take it round, Beth. The air will do you good," said Joe, adding apologetically, "I'd go, but I want to finish my story. My head aches, and I'm tired, so I thought maybe some of you would go," said Beth. "Amy will be in presently, and she will run down for us," suggested Meg. "Well, I'll rest a little and wait for her." So Beth lay down on the sofa. The others returned to their work, and the Hummels were forgotten. An hour passed. Amy did not come. Meg went to her room to try on a new dress. Joe was absorbed in her story, and Hannah was sound asleep before the kitchen fire, when Beth quietly put on her hood, filled her basket with odds and ends for the poor children, and went out into the chilly air with a heavy head, and a grieved look in her patient eyes. It was late when she came back, and no one saw her creep upstairs and shut herself into her mother's room. Half an hour after, Joe went to Mother's closet for something, and there found Beth sitting on the medicine chest, looking very grave, with red eyes, and a camphor bottle in her hand. "Christopher Columbus, what's the matter?" cried Joe, as Beth put out her hand as if to warn her off, and asked quickly, "You had scarlet fever, haven't you?" "Years ago, when Meg did. Why?" "Then I'll tell you. Oh, Joe, the baby's dead." "What baby?" "Mrs. Hummel's. It died in my lap before she got home," cried Beth with a sob. "My poor dear, how dreadful for you. I ought to have gone," said Joe, taking her sister in her lap as she sat down in her mother's big chair with a remorseful face. "It wasn't dreadful, Joe, only so sad. I saw in a minute that it was sicker, but Lottchen said her mother had gone for a doctor, so I took the baby and let Lottie rest. It seemed asleep, but all of a sudden it gave a little cry and trembled, and then lay very still. I tried to warm its feet, and Lottie gave it some milk, but it didn't stir, and I knew it was dead. Don't cry, dear. What did you do?" "I just sat and held it softly till Mrs. Hummel came with the doctor. He said it was dead, and looked at Heinrich and Minna, who have got sore throats. Scarlet fever, ma'am. Ought to have called me before," he said crossly. Mrs. Hummel told him she was poor and had tried to cure the baby herself, but now it was too late, and she could only ask him to help the others and trust to charity for his pay. He smiled then and was kinder, but it was very sad, and I cried with them till he turned round all of a sudden and told me to go home and take belladonna right away, or I'd have the fever. "No, you won't," cried Joe, hugging her close with a frightened look. "Oh, Beth, if you should be sick, I never could forgive myself. What shall we do?" "Don't be frightened. I guess I shan't have it badly. I looked in the mother's book and saw that it begins with headache, sore throat, and queer feelings like mine. So I did take some belladonna, and I feel better," said Beth, laying her cold hands on her hot forehead and trying to look well. "If Mother was only at home," exclaimed Joe, seizing the book and feeling that Washington was an immense way off. She read a page, looked at Beth, felt her head, peeped into her throat, and then said gravely, "You've been over the baby every day for more than a week, and among the others who are going to have it. So I'm afraid you're going to have it, Beth. I'll call Hannah. She knows all about sickness." "Don't let Amy come. She never had it, and I should hate to give it to her. Can't you and Meg have it over again?" asked Beth anxiously. "I guess not. I don't care if I do. Serve me right, selfish pig, to let you go and stay writing rubbish myself," muttered Joe, as she went to consult Hannah. The good soul was wide awake in a minute and took the lead at once, assuring Joe that there was no need to worry. Everyone had scarlet fever, and if rightly treated, nobody died, all of which Joe believed and felt much relieved as they went up to call Meg. "Now I'll tell you what we'll do," said Hannah, when she had examined and questioned Beth. "We will have Dr. Bangs just to take a look at you, dear, and see that we start right. Then we'll send Amy off to Aunt March's for a spell to keep her out of harm's way, and one of you girls can stay at home and amuse Beth for a day or two." "I shall stay, of course. I'm oldest," began Meg, looking anxious and self-reproachful. "I shall, because it's my fault she's sick. I told Mother I'd do the errands, and I haven't," said Joe decidedly. "Which will you have, Beth? There ain't no need of but one," said Hannah. "Joe, please," said Beth, and she leaned her head against her sister with a contented look, which effectually settled that point. "I'll go and tell Amy," said Meg, feeling a little hurt, yet rather relieved on the whole, for she did not like nursing, and Joe did. Amy rebelled outright and passionately declared that she had rather have the fever than go to Aunt March. Meg reasoned, pleaded, and commanded, all in vain. Amy protested that she would not go, and Meg left her in despair to ask Hannah what should be done. Before she came back, Laurie walked into the parlor to find Amy sobbing with her head in the sofa cushions. She told her story, expecting to be consoled, but Laurie only put his hands in his pockets and walked about the room, whistling softly as he knit his brows in deep thought. Presently he sat down beside her and said in his most wheedlesome tone, "Now be a sensible little woman, and do as they say. No, don't cry, but hear what a jolly plan I've got. You go to Aunt March's, and I'll come and take you out every day, driving or walking, and we'll have capital times. Won't that be better than moping here?" "I don't wish to be sent off as if I was in the way," began Amy in an injured voice. "Bless your little heart, child. It's all to keep you well. You don't want to be sick, do you?" "No, I'm sure I don't, but I dare say I shall be, for I've been with Beth all this time." "That's the very reason you ought to go away at once, so that you may escape it. Change of air and care will keep you well, I dare say, or if it don't entirely, you will have the fever more lightly. I advise you to be off as soon as you can, for scarlet fever is no joke, miss." "But it's dull at Aunt March's, and she is so cross," said Amy, looking rather frightened. "It won't be dull with me popping in every day to tell you how Beth is, and take you out gallivanting. The old lady likes me, and I'll be as clever as possible to her, so she won't peck at us whatever we do. Will you take me out in the trotting wagon with Puck, on my honor as a gentleman, and come home every single day? See if I don't. And bring me back the minute Beth is well, the identical minute. And go to the theater, truly? A dozen theaters, if we may." "Well, I guess I will," said Amy slowly. "Good girl. Sing out for Meg, and tell her you'll give in. said Laurie with an approving pat, which annoyed Amy more than the giving in. Meg and Joe came running down to behold the miracle which had been wrought, and Amy, feeling very precious and self-sacrificing, promised to go, if the doctor said Beth was going to be ill. "How is the little dear?" asked Laurie, for Beth was his especial pet, and he felt more anxious about her than he liked to show. "She is lying down on Mother's bed, and feels better. The baby's death troubled her, but I dare say she has only got cold. Hannah says she thinks so, but she looks worried, and that makes me fidgety," answered Meg. "What a trying world it is," said Joe, rumpling up her hair in a fretful sort of way. "No sooner do we get out of one trouble than down comes another. There don't seem to be anything to hold on to when Mother's gone, so I'm all at sea." "Well, don't make a porcupine of yourself. It isn't becoming. Settle your wig, Joe, and tell me if I shall telegraph to your mother or do anything," asked Laurie, who never had been reconciled to the loss of his friend's one beauty. That is what troubles me," said Meg. "I think we ought to tell her if Beth is really ill, but Hannah says we mustn't, for Mother can't leave Father, and it will only make them anxious. Beth won't be sick long, and Hannah knows just what to do, and Mother said we were to mind her, so I suppose we must, but it don't seem quite right to me." Well, I can't say. Suppose you ask Grandfather after the doctor has been." "We will. Joe, go and get Dr. Bangs at once," commanded Meg. "We can't decide anything till he has been." "Stay where you are, Joe. I'm errand boy to this establishment," said Laurie, taking up his cap. "I'm afraid you're busy," began Meg. "No, I've done my lessons for the day." "Do you study in vacation time?" asked Joe. "I'll follow the good example my neighbors set me," was Laurie's answer, as he swung himself out of the room. "I have great hopes of my boy," observed Joe, watching him fly over the fence with an approving smile. "He does very well for a boy," was Meg's somewhat ungracious answer, for the subject did not interest her. Dr. Bangs came and said Beth had symptoms of the fever, but thought she would have it lightly, though he looked sober over the Hummel story. Amy was ordered off at once, and provided with something to ward off danger, she departed in great state, with Joe and Laurie as escort. Aunt March received them with her usual hospitality. What do you want now?" she asked, looking sharply over her spectacles, while the parrot, sitting on the back of her chair, called out, "Go away! No boys allowed here!" Laurie retired to the window, and Joe told her story. "No more than I expected. If you are allowed to go poking about among poor folks, Amy can stay and make herself useful if she isn't sick, which I've no doubt she will be. Looks like it now. Don't cry, child. It worries me to hear people sniff." Amy was on the point of crying, but Laurie slyly pulled the parrot's tail, which caused Polly to utter an astonished croak and call out, "Bless my boots!" in such a funny way that she laughed instead. "What do you hear from your mother?" asked the old lady gruffly. "Father is much better," replied Joe, trying to keep sober. "Oh, is he? Well, that won't last long, I fancy. March never had any stamina," was the cheerful reply. "Ha, ha, never say die. Take a pinch for snuff. Goodbye, goodbye," squalled Polly, dancing on her perch and clawing at the old lady's cap as Laurie tweaked him in the rear. "Hold your tongue, you disrespectful old bird, and Joe, you'd better go at once. It isn't proper to be gadding about so late with a rattle-pated boy like—" "Hold your tongue, you disrespectful old bird," cried Polly, tumbling off the chair with a bounce and running to peck the rattle-pated boy, who was shaking with laughter at the last speech. "I don't think I can bear it, but I'll try," thought Amy, as she left alone with Aunt March. "Get along, you're a fright," screamed Polly, and at that rude speech Amy could not restrain her sniff. Okay, next chapter is Dark Days. I am so sorry. I was not expecting the baby to die, and it was kind of sudden too. Here is a picture. Like I said, I've not read this book, so
Surprise either one of your online viewers right now. So
didn't surprise the online viewers is what I just heard. Okay, so Here is Alcott's portable case of homeopathic medicines, including the arsenic trioxide. So there it is right there. It actually looks not that dissimilar from our medicine box that we have.
Essential oil.
Or an essential oils box. Yes, exactly. Okay, so now we're on chapter 18, Dark Days. And I'm going to just make sure that this chapter is not exorbitantly long. It's not too bad. Let's see. Yeah, okay. Perfect. So let's go ahead and get started. Beth did have the fever and was much sicker than anyone but Hannah, and the doctor suspected. The girls knew nothing about illness, and Mr. Lawrence was not allowed to see her, so Hannah had everything all her own way, and busy Dr. Bangs did his best, but left a good deal to the excellent nurse. Excuse me. Meg stayed at home lest she should infect the Kings, and kept house, feeling very anxious and a little guilty when she wrote letters in which no mention was made of Beth's illness. She could not think it right to deceive her mother, but she had been bidden to mind Hannah, and Hannah wouldn't hear of Mrs. March being told, and worried just for such a trifle. Jo devoted herself to Beth day and night, not a hard task, for Beth was very patient and bore her pain uncomplainingly as long as she could control herself. But there came a time when, during the fever fits, she began to talk in a hoarse, broken voice, to play on the coverlet as if on her beloved little piano, and try to sing with a throat so swollen that there was no music left, a time when she did not know the familiar faces round her, but addressed them by wrong names, and called imploringly for her mother. So, if calling people by wrong names makes you sick, then I might be sick, because I do that all the time. Then Jo grew frightened. Meg begged to be allowed to write the truth, and even Hannah said she would think of it, though there was no danger yet. A letter from Washington added to their trouble, for Mr. March had a relapse, and could not think of coming home for a long while. How dark the days seemed now, how sad and lonely the house, and how heavy were the hearts of the sisters as they worked and waited, while the shadow of death hovered over the once happy home. Then it was that Margaret, sitting alone with tears dropping often on her work, felt how rich she had been in things more precious than any luxuries money could buy, in love, protection, peace, and health, the real blessings of life. Then it was that Jo, living in the darkened room with that suffering little sister always before her eyes, and that pathetic voice sounding in her ears, learned to see the beauty and the sweetness of Beth's nature, to feel how deep and tender a place she filled in all hearts, and to acknowledge the worth of Beth's unselfish ambition, to live for others and make home happy by the exercise of those simple virtues which all may possess, and which all should love and value more than talent, wealth, or beauty. And Amy, in her exile, longed eagerly to be at home, that she might work for Beth, feeling now that no service would be hard or irksome, and remembering with regretful grief how many neglected tasks those willing hands had done for her. Laurie haunted the house like a restless ghost, and Mr. Lawrence locked the grand piano because he could not bear to be reminded of the young neighbor who used to make the twilight pleasant for him. Everyone missed Beth. The milkman, the baker, grocer, and butcher inquired how she did. Poor Mrs. Hummel came to beg pardon for her thoughtlessness, and to get a shroud for Minna. The neighbors sent all sorts of comforts and good wishes, and even those who knew her best were surprised to find how many friends shy little Beth had made. Meanwhile, she lay on her bed with old Joanna at her side, for even in her wanderings she did not forget her forlorn protégé. She longed for her cats, but would not have them brought, lest they should get sick, and in her quiet hours she was full of anxiety about Jo. she sent loving messages to Amy, bade them tell her mother that she would write soon, and often begged for pencil and paper to try to say a word, that father might not think she had neglected him. But soon even these intervals of consciousness ended, and she lay hour after hour tossing to and fro with incoherent words on her lips, or sank into a heavy sleep which brought her no refreshment. Dr. Bangs came twice a day. Hannah sat up at night. Meg kept a telegram in her desk all ready to send off at any minute, and Joe never stirred from Beth's side. The 1st of December was a wintry day indeed to them, for a bitter wind blew, snow fell fast, and the year seemed getting ready for its death. When Dr. Bangs came that morning, he looked long at Beth, held the hot hand in both his own a minute, and laid it gently down, saying in a low tone to Hannah, "If Mrs. March can leave her husband, she'd better be sent for." Hannah nodded without speaking, for her lips twitched nervously. Meg dropped down into a chair as the strength seemed to go out of her limbs at the sound of those words, and Joe, after standing with a pale face for a minute, ran to the parlor, snatched up the telegram, and, throwing on her things, rushed out into the storm. She was soon back, and while noiselessly taking off her cloak, Laurie came in with a letter saying that Mr. March was mending again. Joe read it thankfully, but the heavy weight did not seem lifted off her heart, and her face was so full of misery that Laurie asked quickly, "What is it? Is Beth worse?" "I've sent for Mother," said Joe, tugging at her rubber boots with a tragical expression. "Good for you, Joe. Did you do it on your own responsibility?" asked Laurie, as he seated her in the hall chair and took off the rebellious boots, seeing how her hands shook. "No, the doctor told us to." "Oh, Joe, it's not so bad as that," cried Laurie with a startled face. "Yes, it is. She don't know us. She don't even talk about the flocks of green doves, as she calls the vine leaves on the wall. She don't look like my Beth, and there's nobody to help us bear it. Mother and father both gone, and God seems so far away I can't find him." As the tears streamed fast down poor Joe's cheeks, she stretched out her hand in a helpless sort of way, as if groping in the dark, and Laurie took it in his, whispering as well as he could with a lump in his throat, "I'm here. Hold on to me, Joe dear." She could not speak, but she did hold on, and the warm grasp of the friendly human hand comforted her sore heart, and seemed to lead her nearer to the divine arm, which alone could uphold her in her trouble. Laurie longed to say something tender and comfortable, but no fitting words came to him, so he stood silent, gently stroking her bent head as her mother used to do. It was the best thing he could have done, far more soothing than the most eloquent words, for Joe felt the unspoken sympathy, and, in the silence, learned the sweet solace which affection administers to sorrow. Soon she dried the tears which had relieved her, and looked up with a grateful face. "Thank you, Teddy. I'm better now. I don't feel so forlorn, and I will try to bear it if it comes. Keep hoping for the best. That will help you lots, Joe. Soon your mother will be here, and then everything will be right. I'm so glad Father is better. Now she won't feel bad about leaving him. Oh, me, it does seem as if all the troubles came in a heap, and I got the heaviest part on my shoulders," sighed Joe, spreading her wet handkerchief over her knees to dry. "Don't Meg pull fair?" asked Laurie, looking indignant. "Oh, yes, she tries to, but she don't love Bethy as I do, and she won't miss her as I shall. Beth is my conscience, and I can't give her up. I can't. Down went Joe's face into the wet handkerchief, and she cried despairingly, for she had kept up bravely till now, and never shed a tear. Laurie drew his hand across his eyes, but could not speak till he had subdued the choky feeling in his throat, and steadied his lips. It might be unmanly, but he couldn't help it, and I am glad of it. Presently, as Joe's sobs quieted, he said hopefully, "I don't think she will die. She's so good, and we all love her so much. I don't believe God will take her away just yet. The good and dear people always do die," groaned Joe, but she stopped crying, for her friend's words cheered her up in spite of her own doubts and fears. "Poor girl, you're worn out. It isn't like you to be forlorn. Stop a bit. I'll hearten you up in a jiffy." Laurie went off 2 stairs at a time, and Joe laid her worried head down on Beth's little brown hood, which no one had thought of moving from the table where she left it. It must have possessed some magic, for the submissive spirit of its gentle owner seemed to enter into Joe, and when Laurie came running down with a glass of wine, she took it with a smile and said bravely, "I drink health to my Beth. You are a good doctor, Teddy, and such a comfortable friend. How can I ever pay you?" she added, as the wine refreshed her body, as the kind words had done her troubled mind. "I'll send in my bill by and by, and tonight I'll give you something that will warm the cockles of your heart better than quarts of wine," said Laurie, beaming at her with a face of suppressed satisfaction at something. "What is it?" cried Joe, forgetting her woes for a minute in her wonder. "I telegraphed to your mother yesterday, and Brooke answered she'd come at once, and she'll be here tonight, and everything will be all right. Aren't you glad I did it?" Laurie spoke very fast and turned red and excited all in a minute, for he had kept his plot a secret for fear of disappointing the girls or harming Beth. Joe grew quite white, flew out of her chair, and the moment she stopped speaking, she electrified him by throwing her arms round his neck and crying out with a joyful cry, "Oh, Laurie! Oh, Mother! I am so glad!" She did not weep again, but laughed hysterically, and trembled and clung to her friend as if she was a little bewildered by the sudden news. Laurie, though decidedly amazed, behaved with great presence of mind. He patted her back soothingly, and finding that she was recovering, followed it up by a bashful kiss or two, which brought Joe round at once. Holding on to the banisters, she put him gently away, saying breathlessly, "Oh, don't! I didn't mean to. It was dreadful of me, but you were such a dear to go and do it in spite of Hannah that I couldn't help flying at you. Tell me all about it, and don't give me wine again. It makes me act so." "I don't mind," laughed Laurie, and as he settled his tie. "Why, you see I got fidgety, and so did Grandpa. We thought Hannah was overdoing the authority business, and your mother ought to know. She'd never forgive us if if anything happened, you know. So I got Grandpa to say it was high time we did something, and off I pelted to the office yesterday, for the doctor looked sober, and Hannah most took my head off when I proposed a telegram. I never can bear to be marmed over, so that settled my mind, and I did it. Your mother will come, I know, and the late train is in at 2 a.m. I shall go for her, and you've only got to bottle up your rapture and keep Beth quiet till that blessed lady gets here. Laurie, you're an angel. How shall I ever thank you?" "Fly at me again. I rather like it," said Laurie, looking mischievous, a thing he had not done for a fortnight. "No, thank you. I'll do it by proxy when your grandpa comes. Don't tease, but go home and rest, for you'll be up half the night. Bless you, Teddy, bless you." Joe had backed into a corner, and as she finished her speech, she vanished precipitately into the kitchen, where she sat down upon a dresser and told the assembled cats that she was happy, oh, so happy, while Laurie departed, feeling that he had made rather a neat thing of it. "That's the interferingest chap I ever see, but I forgive him, and do hope Mrs. March is coming on right away," said Hannah with an air of relief when Joe told the good news. Meg had a quiet rapture, and then brooded over the letter, while Joe set the sick room in order, and Hannah knocked up a couple of pies in case of company unexpected. A breath of fresh air seemed to blow through the house, and something better than sunshine brightened the quiet rooms. Everything appeared to feel the hopeful change. Beth's bird began to chirp again, and a half-blown rose was discovered on Amy's bush in the window. The fire seemed to burn with unusual cheeriness, and every time the girls met, their pale faces broke into smiles as they hugged one another, whispering encouragingly, "Mother's coming, dear, Mother's coming." Everyone rejoiced but Beth. She lay in that heavy stupor, alike unconscious of hope and joy, doubt and danger. It was a piteous sight, the once rosy face so changed and vacant, the once busy hands so weak and wasted, the once smiling lips quite dumb, and the once pretty, well-kept hair scattered rough and tangled on the pillow. All day she lay so, only rousing now and then to mutter, "Water?" with lips so parched they could hardly shape the word. All day Joe and Meg hovered over her, watching, waiting, hoping, and trusting in God and Mother. And all day the snow fell, the bitter wind raged, and the hours dragged slowly by. But night came at last, and every time the clock struck, the sisters, still sitting on either side of the bed, looked at each other with brightening eyes, for each hour brought help nearer. The doctor had been in to say that some change, for better or worse, would probably take place about midnight, at which time he would return. Hannah, quite worn out, lay down on the sofa at the bed's foot and fell fast asleep. Mr. Lawrence marched to and fro in the parlor, feeling that he would rather face a rebel battery than Mrs. March's anxious countenance as she entered. Laurie lay on the rug, pretending to rest, but staring into the fire with the thoughtful look which made his black eyes beautifully soft and clear. The girls never forgot that night, for no sleep came to them as they kept their watch, with that dreadful sense of powerlessness which comes to us in hours like those. "If God spares Beth, I never will complain again," whispered Meg earnestly. "If God spares Beth, I'll try to love and serve Him all my life," answered Joe with equal fervor. "I wish I had no heart, it aches so," sighed Meg after a pause. "If life is often as hard as this, I don't see how ever we shall get through it," added her sister despondently. Here the clock struck 12, and both forgot themselves in watching Beth, for they fancied a change passed over her wan face. The house was still as death, and nothing but the wailing of the wind broke the deep hush. Weary, Hannah slept on, and no one but the sisters saw the pale shadow which seemed to fall upon the little bed. An hour went by, and nothing happened except Laurie's quiet departure for the station. Another hour, still no one came, and anxious fears of delay in the storm, or accidents by the way, or, worst of all, a great grief at Washington, haunted the poor girls. It was past 2 when Joe, who stood at the window thinking how dreary the world looked in its winding sheet of snow, heard a movement by the bed, and turning quickly saw Meg kneeling before their mother's easy-chair with her face hidden. A dreadful fear passed coldly over Joe as she thought, "Beth is dead, and Meg is afraid to tell me." She was back at her post in an instant, and to her excited eyes a great change seemed to have taken place. The fever flush and the look of pain were gone, and the beloved little face looked so pale and peaceful in its utter repose, that Joe felt no desire to weep or to lament. Leaning low over this dearest of her sisters, she kissed the damp forehead with her heart on her lips, and softly whispered, "Goodbye, my Beth, goodbye." As if waked by the stir, Hannah started out of her sleep, hurried to the bed, looked at Beth, felt her hands, listened at her lips, and then, throwing her apron over her head, sat down to rock to and fro, exclaiming under her breath, "The fever's turned. She's sleeping natural. Her skin's damp, and she breathes easy. Praise be given, oh my goodness me." Before the girls could believe the happy truth, the doctor came to confirm it. He was a homely man, but they thought his face quite heavenly when he smiled, and said with a fatherly look at them, "Yes, my dears, I think the little girl will pull through this time. Keep the house quiet, let her sleep, and when she wakes, give her—" what they were to give, neither heard, for both crept into the dark hall, and sitting on the stairs held each other close, rejoicing with their hearts too full of words. When they went back to be kissed and cuddled by faithful Hannah, they found Beth lying as she used to do, with her cheek pillowed on her hand, the dreadful pallor gone, and breathing quietly as if just fallen asleep. "If Mother would only come now," said Joe, as the winter night began to wane. "See," said Meg, coming up with a white, half-opened rose. "I thought this would hardly be ready to lay in Beth's hand tomorrow, if she went away from us. But it has blossomed in the night, and now I mean to put it in my vase here, so that when the darling wakes, the first thing she sees will be the little rose and Mother's face." Never had the sun risen so beautifully, and never had the world seemed so lovely as it did to the heavy eyes of Meg and Joe as they looked out in the early morning when their long, sad vigil was done. "It looks like a fairy world," said Meg, smiling to herself as she stood behind the curtain watching the dazzling sight. "Hark!" cried Joe, starting to her feet. Yes, there was a sound of bells at the door below, a cry from Hannah, and then Laurie's voice saying in a joyful whisper, "Girls, she's come, she's come!" And that is the end of chapter 18. Next time we'll read chapter 19, which is called Amy's Will, and the first word is while. So let's just go back very quickly and look at the pictures. They're all at the beginning of this. Here is the orchard house in the snow. And that's a nice house. And this one is an airy, immaculately kept Union Hospital ward. Presumably during the Civil War. I didn't read the whole little caption there, but... And I think there was one more. Yep. This is from one of the movies. 1949, Margaret O'Brien is playing Beth, and she's clinging to life in this picture. There she is. All right, so if you enjoyed the story today, go ahead and give it a nice little thumbs up and a heart, whatever you want. And we'll see you next time. God bless, and have a good night.